HOA shot my service dog, unaware I'm Congress. The gunshot exploded across my quiet suburban lawn. My service dog Max yelped and collapsed, blood pooling beneath him as neighbors gasped in horror. Karen Whitfield, HOA president, stood with smoking gun in hand, her face twisted in self-righteous anger. That animal was violating our lawn ornament restrictions, she declared, waving her HOA rulebook. Her triumphant smile froze as neighbors' phones recorded everything. I dropped to my knees beside Max, rage building inside me. That lawn ornament violation is my certified service dog, I said, voice ice cold. And I'm Congressman James Sullivan, member of the Federal Housing Committee. Her face drained of color as she realized who I was. The crowd murmured, cameras capturing her husband trying to hide the HOA enforcement binder. 1 year later, Max limps beside me through our garden. The bullet wound healed, but he still flinches at loud sounds. I thought our war with the HOA was over when the association was dissolved after the shooting. The corruption exposed, Karen disgraced. I was wrong. A note appeared on my door this morning. You destroyed our neighborhood. Now we'll destroy you. My phone buzzes. It's my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Jackson. Karen's back. She's running for city council with plans to reinstate the HOA with expanded powers. First campaign meeting, tonight. I look down at Max. Our war isn't over, buddy. It's just beginning. That evening I park a block from the community center, baseball cap pulled low. Stay close, I whisper to Max as we slip in through the back. The room is packed with familiar faces from the old HOA, joined by strangers wearing matching red, Restore Oak Estates t-shirts. Karen stands at the podium almost unrecognizable. Gone is the screeching HOA enforcer. This Karen wears a tailored pantsuit, speaks with practiced calm, and gestures like a seasoned politician. Oak Estates was once the crown jewel of this county, she says. Then special interests dismantled. Our protections. Property values have plummeted. Crime is up. Our community is being destroyed. None of it's true. Our neighborhood is thriving since the HOA dissolved. But the crowd nods along, anger building with each lie. And the architect of our destruction? Karen clicks to a slide showing my house. Congressman James Sullivan, who used his political power to override our democratically elected Homeowners Association. I record everything on my phone as a man stands up. My daughter can't sell her house now, values down 30%. Another shouts, my car was broken into, never happened before the HOA dissolved. If elected to city council, Karen continues, I'll pass the Neighborhood Protection Act, giving HOAs new legal authority backed by city enforcement. No more special exemptions, not even for congressmen and their dangerous animals. The crowd erupts in applause. As they stand, Mrs. Jackson spots me and subtly shakes her head in warning. Too late. Karen's eyes lock with mine. Well, speaking of the congressman, ladies and gentlemen, our special guest has arrived. Every head turns. Smartphones rise to record. Congressman Sullivan, care to address your neighbors? I step forward. I'm just here to listen, but since you mentioned property values, I'd be interested in seeing your data. Karen's smile tightens. The evidence is clear to anyone living here. Actually, I counter, county records show values up 12% since last year. I'm happy to share the official assessments. A murmur spreads through the crowd. Karen quickly redirects. The real issue is safety. We've had 3 break-ins since the HOA disbanded. Police reports show crime down 20% year over year, I reply. Again, happy to share the data. As I leave, a tall man bumps hard against my shoulder. You should have stayed in Washington, he hisses. The next morning, I find my car windshield smashed. The security camera spray-painted black. My assistant Sarah arrives with coffee and grim news. Karen's ally on the Planning Commission fast-tracked a special election for the Neighborhood Protection Act. Votes in 2 weeks. I pull up the draft legislation and my blood runs cold. It would grant private HOAs authority to issue legally binding fines, place property liens without court approval, and authorize private security to enforce violations, including animal control. This isn't about property values, I tell Sarah. This is Karen weaponizing local government for revenge, and she's got powerful backing. The legislation was drafted by Platinum Communities LLC, one of the largest real estate developers in the state. I spent days investigating. Platinum has been buying foreclosed properties across the county at bargain prices, especially those seized by aggressive HOAs. They'd have a legal mechanism to force out homeowners who couldn't afford mounting fines. My doorbell rings late that night. Mrs. Jackson stands trembling on my porch. "They came to my house," she whispers, "offered to buy it for half its value. When I refused, they said the new HOA would find my garden problematic and the fines would force me out eventually." Campaign signs for Karen appear everywhere. My yard signs disappear, my online posts flooded with personal attacks. Then comes the video. Max barking at a delivery truck from my security footage, cut with aggressive dog attacks from the internet. It goes viral with the caption, "The Congressman's service dog, still a danger to our community." I've had enough. Max and I drive to Platinum Communities LLC headquarters. "Please tell Mr. Vance that Congressman Sullivan is here regarding the Neighborhood Protection Act." 20 minutes later, I'm escorted to Robert Vance's corner office. Silver-haired and expensively dressed, he greets me with practiced warmth. "Congressman, what a surprise. I've long admired your work on the Housing Committee. Then you know I have oversight on federal housing grants, including the ones your company received." His smile falters. "I assume this is about Oak Estates, a simple local matter." "A local matter funded by your company. The same company that's bought 47 properties from HOA foreclosures at 40% below market value." Vance's demeanor chills. "Everything we do is legal." "Is it?" "I've been reviewing the financing behind these HOAs. Interesting how they all received management training from shell companies tracing back to Platinum." He leans forward. "You should be careful, Congressman. Your term ends next year. Powerful people are watching how you handle this situation." "Are you threatening a federal official?" "Just offering perspective. Your dog incident made compelling TV, but do you want to stake your career on a neighborhood squabble? We have friends in both parties." As I leave Platinum's offices, my phone buzzes with texts from Sarah. "Emergency HOA meeting called for tonight. Special guest, my former chief of staff David Mills, now working for a neighborhood advocacy PAC." I arrive home to find Max barking frantically at the back door. The gate stands open. Inside, furniture overturned, papers scattered. My laptop gone, along with my files on Platinum Communities. Worse, Max's medication is missing. The specialized treatment for his bullet wound that costs $1,000 per month. My phone rings. Karen's voice, sickly sweet. "Terrible about the break-in. If only you had neighborhood security, maybe after the vote passes." "Where is it, Karen?" "Where's what?" "Oh, your dog's medicine. Funny how things disappear when you don't have proper security. Maybe you'll find it after the vote, if you publicly endorse our initiative." I hang up, rage building. They've gone too far. My doorbell rings. A courier delivers an unmarked package. Inside, a USB drive with a note. "From a friend at Platinum who doesn't like being part of this. The files reveal everything. Platinum's strategy to use HOAs to force foreclosures, targeting elderly and disabled homeowners first. Internal emails discussing how to make life difficult for me specifically. And most damning, coordination between Platinum, Karen, and 3 city council members, including kickbacks and illegal campaign contributions, but without my laptop." and original documents. I have no way to verify the authenticity of these files. Using them could backfire spectacularly. Then Max collapses in the kitchen, whimpering in pain without his medication. I face an impossible choice: publicly surrender to Karen's demands to get Max's medicine, or risk everything, including Max's health, to expose the corruption before the vote. Sarah arrives, sees Max's condition and my desperation. Karen called the local news, she says. She's telling everyone you're scheduled to make a statement supporting the Protection Act at tonight's meeting. Max whimpers again, struggling to stand. I think I have a plan, I tell Sarah, but we'll need Mrs. Jackson's help, and I'm going to need you to make some calls. The community center is standing room only for the emergency meeting. Karen stands confidently at the podium, flanked by platinum executives and city officials. My former chief of staff, David Mills, sits prominently in the front row. We've called this special information session before the vote, Karen announces, and I'm pleased to say Congressman Sullivan has reconsidered his opposition to our Neighborhood Protection Act. The crowd murmurs in surprise as I walk down the center aisle, Max limping beside me. He looks weak without his medication, but his presence is essential. Karen's practiced smile doesn't reach her eyes. The congressman has agreed to say a few words in support of our initiative. I approach the microphone slowly, surveying the room. Local news cameras record everything. Perfect. Thank you, Karen. I have indeed reconsidered my position. I pause, as satisfaction flashes across her face. I've reconsidered whether private citizens should know what corporations like Platinum Communities are doing to manipulate property values and force foreclosures. Karen lunges for the microphone. I've reconsidered whether the public should know about the coordinated campaign to target elderly and disabled homeowners with fraudulent violations. Robert Vance stands up. This is slander. And I've especially reconsidered whether voters should know about the kickbacks to city officials in exchange for fast-tracking legislation. Chaos erupts. Karen screeches for security. Two men move toward me but stop when cameras turn their way. You have no proof, Karen hisses. I smile. Actually, I do. Not on the USB drive your people planted after stealing my laptop. That was amateur hour. The real evidence is already with the FBI, the Housing Committee, and every major news outlet. Her face drains of color. You see, Karen, after you shot my dog, I learned to back up everything to secure servers and to wear a wire to every meeting, including my conversation with Robert Vance yesterday. The rear doors open as federal agents enter. And one more thing, I continue, pulling out my phone. About Max's medication you stole, that triggered a federal investigation under the Service Animal Protection Act I helped pass last year. Interfering with a service animal's care is now a federal offense. David Mills suddenly stands. Karen, Robert, this is over. I'm not going down for this. He turns to the federal agents. I have documentation of every meeting, every payment. I'll cooperate fully. Karen's composure shatters completely. You traitor, we had a deal. The deal changed when you decided to hurt an animal. Mills responds. That wasn't part of our agreement. An agent approaches Vance. Robert Vance, you're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and campaign finance violations. Another agent moves toward Karen. Karen Whitfield, you're under arrest for animal cruelty, conspiracy, and theft of prescription medication. As they're being led away, Mrs. Jackson appears at my side, holding a familiar container. Found this in Karen's car, she says, handing me Max's medication. Figured she wouldn't notice with all those campaign signs in her trunk. Karen struggles against the agent. You had no right to go in my car. Actually, Mrs. Jackson replies calmly, I'm on your new neighborhood watch committee, just doing my job reporting suspicious activities. I kneel to give Max his medication as reporters crowd around us. Congressman, did you orchestrate this entire confrontation? one asks. No, I simply refuse to be bullied. When they stole Max's medication, they crossed a line from harassment to potentially lethal criminality. What about the USB drive Karen mentioned? A clumsy attempt to discredit me. They thought if I used possibly doctored evidence, they could claim everything was fabricated. But we were 3 steps ahead. I addressed the room. For 2 years, Platinum Communities has been exploiting HOAs across the state to force foreclosures, buying properties at fraction of their value and using political connections to shield themselves. Tonight, that ends. Sarah steps forward with printouts for the reporters. This investigation began months ago. Congressman Sullivan has been working with federal authorities since discovering the pattern of foreclosures. A reporter asks, "What about the neighborhood Protection Act vote?" The county commissioner rises. "In light of tonight's events, the special election is suspended, pending investigation of fraud in the petition process." "And what's next for Oak Estates?" Another reporter calls out. "We're establishing a true neighborhood association, not an enforcement agency, but a community organization focused on helping neighbors, not punishing them." Mrs. Jackson adds, "We're starting with a community garden where Karen's house stands. After foreclosure, the property will be donated back to the neighborhood." As the crowd disperses, I sit on a bench outside with Max, giving him the long overdue medication. The senior FBI agent approaches. "Quite a performance, Congressman. Your team executed the plan perfectly. We had help. Turns out, when you threaten people's homes and hurt their neighbors' dogs, they'll work together." "And Mills? You knew he'd flip?" "David always follows the path of least resistance. Once he knew we had Vance, he'd save himself." "Well, your wire. Recording of Vance's threat gives us everything we need, and we found your stolen files in Karen's garage. Exactly where you suggested we look." Max rests his head on my lap, the pain medication finally taking effect. As the agent leaves, a group of neighbors gathers around us. "Is it really over?" Mrs. Jackson asks. "The corrupt HOA is done. Now the real work begins. Building something better." 3 months later, Max and I sit in our garden, watching the new community playground being installed where Karen's house once stood. After Platinum Communities' CEO was indicted, the company donated the foreclosed properties back to the original owners and funded community improvements as part of their settlement. The doorbell rings. Mrs. Jackson stands there with a basket of muffins and several neighbors I now know by name. "The Community Garden Committee meeting still on for today?" she asks with a smile. As we gather around my patio table, discussing plans for a neighborhood farmers market, my phone buzzes with news alerts. Governor signs HOA Reform Act, named after service dog Max. The legislation, born from our neighborhood's struggle, creates new protections against HOA, overreach nationwide, and strengthens service animal protections. "Congressman, we couldn't have done this without you," Mrs. Jackson says. "Actually, it was Max who sparked everything," I reply, scratching behind his ears. "Sometimes it takes something shocking, like an HOA shooting a congressman's dog, to expose corruption and create real change." Max wags his tail, his limp barely noticeable now. The war isn't just over. We've changed the battlefield. Entirely. What began with a gunshot ended with a community finding its voice. As children laugh on the new playground, I realize, in trying to silence us, Karen gave us the very weapon we needed to be heard.